So talking about some of the work you've been doing, one of the newer things you've come up with, I think it was just earlier this season, you released is this impact rating, right? So why don't you go ahead and explain it?
Yeah, yeah. So impact rating, I won't pretend like this is a new idea or anything earth-shattering, but I do think that most people would agree that first off, people think that KD rules COD. It always has. It's been on the scoreboard since back when I started playing Modern Warfare, yeah, COD 4. It's the one thing that everyone sees, and I think players tie their worth to KD. Fans certainly tie players' worth to KD, to teams' worth. Everything is KD centric. And in the past, I've done some of it myself. I've seen others do it. Try to make metrics that just not ignore KD, but yeah, are separate from KD. Let's do this thing that combines these other things. But yeah, we all know that a player going 30 and 10 is not just that player having a good game. Certainly, their teammates are making the game easier for them. And I always see player impact is what we're talking about. The player's influence on the map is this scale. If a team wins a game, you could, on one end, you could just give all four players 25% of the credit. And on the other hand, you could just weighted proportionally give them credit based on how many kills and deaths they got. And I think the answer everyone knows is somewhere in between those two. Some people try to make their own scale separate, but so I think impact rating, if I had to say what it's like, just sliding that scale a little bit farther from one side closer to the other side. So it's basically a combination of KD, and then it's like the novel part here is just considering the score and how many kills and how many points each kill and death lead to. So a good example is like a game where you win 250 to 100 in hardpoint. Each death you have didn't really give them that many points, even if you did die a lot. And so players that die a lot in a game that you win by 150 points, it just doesn't matter as much. And so we take KD and we just adjust it a little. We say, okay, those deaths are just not really worth that much. And then on the other hand, I think I mentioned this in the article, and I do encourage. I put the full name of the government name of the article here, so if anybody's reading this, they can Google search it to find the article, because I know we can't do links on the actual screen. But yes, I think like the thing that the impetus for this specifically was Doug Sensor Martin going 4-22 in a game that they won by like 100 points or something like that. Okay, he did not provide any impact with his kills. He only had four of them. But like, how detrimental were those deaths? They clearly still skated through against a team that was fairly strong. It was just I think it was just a scrim map or something. But yeah, it's just like, that begs the questions. Okay, KD over here is definitely not the right answer. But yeah, how much credit should Doug get for a game in which he goes 4-22? And basically, my conclusion is probably not much, but more than you get if you give him just credit for his KD. And so I think impact rating tries to do that by considering the points scored. I've already made some adjustments based on the fact that in games like Control, there are only 5 points to go around. It can be a little bit more feast or famine, but yeah, at the base, it is just an adjustment to KD. And you'll see I've scaled all impact ratings to be centered around one being average, which is similar to what you'd expect from KD. At first, I had them as like true like impact, like the number of points this player I say should get credit for, but just makes it confusing to read across modes, and it makes it very hard to standardize. So yeah, everything is standardized. A 1.33 is one standard deviation better than the mean impact rating of all the players in the training set. So yeah, I think that's pretty much the basics of it. I will say Breaking Point is looks like they're coming out with a rating, something that I had helped develop last year, but certainly has taken on a life of its own separately of what I had developed. So it very similar, like similar thought process, because I also had started that. But I think both of these are doing the same sort of thing, which is just trying to add a little bit more context, a little more game context or results based context to players' score lines. Um, yeah, I put what's next here. I do think there's no reason to avoid or shy away from other stats that we have access to on the broadcast, albeit very few. We do know the non-traded kill percentages. We know the first deaths and first bloods in search and destroy. Like things like that can be added in. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
And yeah, with damage there too, it is interesting, right? Because I definitely feel like a need for using these more adjusted stats because we see like games where a team will get outslayed and win. Like they'll win a hard point or maybe even win a control in some cases. Now it's rare, but it does happen though, right? And I think people are like, "Oh, they lost." Okay, they lost, but Not really, though, right? Like they lost, but they should have won. And we see this is a lot more of, say, NFL concept or a football concept, right? Where one team will like massively outplay the other team, but due to a fumble or like an interception or something, they'll lose a game, right? Now, obviously, there's no equivalent of interception in COD, not really. Okay, you either die or you kill someone. There's no real kind of third option where you like die twice. There's nothing along that lines. So there's no real change of impact. There's no play that it basically is equivalent to an interception or a fumble. But there is still that variance of, oh, okay, they just like really efficient. They got really lucky with some spawns maybe, or something happened.
Yeah.
And this is more along the lines of, okay, now we can actually use this to properly assess the teams. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
No, I
Good
think
for
I think
the next slide.
yeah, I know. I was just gonna say, I think you hit on at something I didn't really mention about this is I do think that like something, yeah, one thing I glean from experience playing with the players is just like how much you mentioned efficiency, like how much efficiency does come into it. Like I'd say like the thing when I first got into it, I like when I first started working with LAG, the thing that surprised me the most about playing really good teams back then it was phase, it hasn't changed much in 4 years or whatever, but is it's just effortless for them to play and the opposite for us. It's just hard to play. Like regardless of how talented the players are, the game is just harder to play. Every death feels like it gives them 8 points, and every kill you get feels like it gains you 10 feet on the map, and that's it. And I do think that although this is very simplistic in its execution, there is something that's maybe a bit more underlying here about it, which is that yeah, teams like FaZe tend to score more points per kill that they get. It's something I've done some research on in the past as well, that yeah, these teams that score more, that is tends to be a bit more repetitive in terms of success than just looking at points scored or yeah, the final outcome. And I think you're 100% right that fans tend to see the game as like binary, win or lose. But yeah, talk about control. Like one kill at the end of the 5th round could be the difference between winning 3-2 and losing 2-3, and that's going from 40% of the points for you to 60% of the points for you on one individual engagement. Like, and yeah, if you come away from that thinking we lost and we're bad, like you got to watch the tape, because yeah, you're one-on-one away from it. Certainly I would always argue, oh, you should go back, why did you let it get to a one-on-one to win the game? But yeah, that's better than losing 3-1 for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then you can
Yeah,
see
so
some.
I have
Mhm.
some, go ahead.
Yeah, you can see an example of some of the impact rating here.
Yeah, yeah, these are just some of the examples of some of the graphs. Yeah, I've been tweeting out for games and stuff like that. Yeah, it's just interesting to see in times, especially when like players, yeah, have outsized impact on their team's wins or better impact even when their team loses. And then the opposite too. Like I think a lot of games where players go even and lose by 100, maybe get swept under the rug. And yeah, we should maybe call them out a bit more or something. I picked Snoopy just because I think he's looked really strong this year as a rookie, someone that I yeah personally like, and yeah, I just it's just a good updated photo through their last game there.
And I think that is the important point too, right? Because obviously we're talking about this in the currently we've been talking about this in the context of picking winners and losers, right? And that is obviously we're obviously a betting podcast, and to be honest, a lot of people want to be like, what's the best team, who's going to win this game, etc. But the flip side of that is what happens when a team is not winning. How do you figure out who the problem, quote unquote, is? Who is the overperforming player? Which players are underperforming? How do you make that better, right? And I think because right now, currently, the way it seems to be decided, at least, is just KD. It's just they have a bad KD, so they're gone, right? And I think that's an overly simplistic view of it. I think this is, in many ways, the issue that this is what Toronto, at least, has looked like, right? Because they had issues, obviously. They got rid of Standy, then they brought in Hixie, then Hixie didn't have a great KD, so they're like, oh, okay, maybe. And they had a really good run there. They made the championship game last year, but they lost it. And I think in the offseason, they decided to go, instead of keeping Kixie, they decided to upgrade to Envoy. Now, to be fair, that is definitely on paper an upgrade, and it currently seems to be working fine for them. Again, we have no doubt on how it would have been if Hixie had been there instead of Envoy, right? Seems to be working out for them, but the question is, does that actually make sense? And I think using these impacts and these kind of more advanced stats, we can actually figure out if that was the correct decision or not.
Yeah, the counter. Yeah, you mentioned the counterfactual there. We can't know how they would have done. Last year. I became obsessed with the like basically with or without you type stats in hardpoint. Like when we still had kill by kill data, you could know who was alive when and how much impact they had. Because yeah, as much as I would say that a player's kills don't win or lose the game, and yeah, Hixie having a low KD has almost nothing to do with Toronto's success or failure. I would say on the other hand that team level kills is a really strong indicator. As much as you can find a couple examples of teams that won games even with a low, like a sub 1 KD, like if you're not getting kills, it is hard to win the game without kills. So I was just obsessed over the summer with, okay, yeah, like when Hixie's alive, is his team getting more kills than when he's dead relative to the fact that they would be down a man if he was dead? And I thought there's some really interesting work there, but then when I found out there wasn't going to be kill level data again this year, it was like, okay, great. I just sunk like a month or two into these sorts of. But I do think I felt like I was getting close to not the holy grail, but just yeah, it's what you're saying. It's we can. I wasn't taking into account who the player who got the kill was. Just like, is this player alive or not in this second, and did that second have a kill for their team or a death for their team or how many or whatever. And like that, it just like when I did that, like some of the stuff that I saw was incredible. I wish I could go more into it, but yeah, it's pointless to talk about it because yeah, we can't get that data anymore. But at least
Hmm.
for now. But hopefully in the future, I do think that's the next frontier for yeah, like determining. And we can talk about this from a betting perspective too. We're starting to see some team changes finally, or not finally. I shouldn't say that. It's been early. We're already starting to see some team changes, and yeah, how do you price a team that has two players on it like Carolina that haven't played before or something like that? It would be really helpful, even if you didn't know how good those players were going to be, to know how detrimental the players that you're losing are. Like if Real is the best player on the team, I'm adjusting my prior a little bit, and now these players coming in, I'm gonna be a little lower on Carolina, or the opposite. And so I do think this has huge betting implications as well. Outside of just how good is the team, it's we see all these team changes. It's the thing at the beginning of the year that I struggle the most with. It's like every team is brand new, and even if they're not brand new, they're playing all brand new teams. So like, how can I possibly get a good grip on what's gonna happen?
Hmm.
Yeah, one thing, if I
Yeah.
could just jump in
Oh,
real
go
quick,
ahead. Go ahead.
Robert.
Yeah.
I just want to make a quick comment about KD being an overrated stat because I think it absolutely is at the player level, like you mentioned before, Doug. It's interesting because the players that have good KDs often have good KDs. Every now and then you'll have a bad map here or a good map for a bad player, but at a team level, I do think KD matters quite a bit. And if you look, and you mentioned it as well, like hardpoint data, the team that gets more kills often wins the game more than they don't. And if you outslay by a lot, you're going to win by a lot. And it matters even more in Search and Destroy, where a kill is essentially like 25% of a round win. If you want to, it's not exactly that, but basically. So at the team level, I do think it matters. I often think of KD just to continue our other sports references. I'm bringing baseball into this now. KD to me is like batting average used to be for baseball, or maybe what OPS was when that was first created. It was like this at a glance stat that anyone could look at and go, okay, I know what a good batting average is, or I know what a good OPS is, and assign that to the player. And then over time, we created war and defensive war and all this stuff so we could really narrow down the value of the player. I love that impact rating is taking into account like wins and losses and how much you won by because, yeah, a lot of times there are bad teams where there are certain players who have really good games, and how much does that matter in the long run? Are they just playing slow, trying to get kills wherever they can, or on the flip side, are they running around recklessly, not with their teammates, things like that? On the other hand, teams that win a lot, even if you have a player who doesn't put up kills and dies a lot, is he affecting spawns? Is he doing a good job of sitting in the hill or picking up first bloods or giving information? Stuff like that. I love what you're doing here. Keep up the good work, and I cannot wait to see where it goes from here.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Yeah, it's all context. I think that's yeah. Batting average doesn't provide any context. It makes it seem like every hit's the same, and even the casual baseball fan realized that pretty quick that a double's better than a single. And yeah, we're and I yeah, the thing we have the problem is that we don't even have that much context to add. In baseball, they had all this data going back 100 years and they just weren't doing much with it. And so, yeah, it was nice. For us, yeah, we're blessed and cursed. Like, we're cursed to know how good everyone else, I think Robert said that, like, we know how good it can be. And I do think there is some danger in trying to skip steps a little bit too. I see that a little in the scene in general. Is like people trying to skip steps and like, go to this next level of analytics where, yeah, like we're still hand taking kill and death stats off the scoreboard so that Breaking Point can post them because the CDL doesn't even give them to us on their own website. You got to have some perspective sometimes. But yeah, speaking of context, I know the next slide, I had a question for you guys to get you guys both get your takes on this a little bit. But I'm curious, like we talk about, yeah, how we can add context, and damage I think has become pretty, it's been talked about a lot more. I've personally been fairly surprised. It was something that we've had, I think Black Ops 4 was the first COD that we started talking about damage, because yeah, health went up to 150, and I think they started putting it on the score. Yeah, it was in Black Ops 4 for sure, because that was the time where Temp had a control that went to round 5 that he had like 8,000 damage and everyone was freaking out. And I do think that like you guys would both probably agree that like you would, I think just based on how I think you see the game, like you go like, went to round 5, so of course he had 8,000. I always laugh at stats that are like the most kills or whatever. It's like, yeah, I want to see the most kills per round or the most kills per minute or something, because yeah, like it's a little easier when the game is super long because your team is not winning. But yeah, so I digress. Damage has become a lot more talked about, and I do think that I've actually, so actually on the first of my pages, I put a link to an article about introducing S&D damage efficiency. I had looked even back then in Black Ops 4 and shown that teams that got more kills per point of damage in search won much more often. And I think it's very intuitive that if you get damage in S&D but it doesn't turn into a kill, not only did you not get the kill, but you've given information to the other team about where you are. And yeah, we saw a clear negative correlation between basically healed off damage and losing, or winning was the negative correlation. But I'm curious your guys' thoughts on this in Respawn, because yeah, I included just this is just like an attention grabber highlight on the next slide of, yeah, a game where I think Scrap went -5, but he had the same amount of damage as other players on the team that had many more kills. And so I know Breaking Point rating takes into account damage, so you see his Breaking Point rating is much higher, yeah, 15 and 20, but had more damage than both Insight and Kleenex here by by a hair. And then like my rating, which doesn't consider damage, I have him a bit lower. But I'm curious your take on this from like a predictive standpoint, like how much does damage add context here? And then also just from you, just like your personal perspective as well. Do you think that talking about damage is something that's helped the conversation, or just a net neutral? Or yeah, just curious. I just think it's something that we're going to start talking about a lot more, especially with Breaking Point rating coming out and being so tied to damage. There are going to be more of these types of scores. It did not take me very long to find this one, just randomly searching, so it will happen.
Yeah. I guess I'll go first on that. I haven't figured out the best way to incorporate it yet, but I actually think damage is extremely important in all this. I kind of view damage as like the way you would view it's like in football where there's like a drive that goes really far, but then something bad happens, like there's an interception or a fumble or a missed field goal, or you don't convert a fourth down. It's like you went most of the way there, but then you just weren't able to convert it. And I think there is a good there. I hadn't thought about that point in the non-respawns in SND, where if you try to kill someone and then you don't kill them, then they know where you are and it actively hurts you in that round. But I feel like in respawns, and I haven't actually done this correlation yet, and I want to. I haven't had the time to, but because I haven't actually reliably been able to have the damage numbers, because sometimes this stuff is available and sometimes it's not available. With Breaking Point is now doing a good job with having this all available, and that's good. But at times it has not been available. But I feel like it's a lot more important, and I feel like because although Scrap's by your impact rating, his impact rating is lower. Your impact rating is technically weighted higher it rewards a kill more than it rewards not a kill, if that makes sense. But damage is, especially in a respawn, it's just, okay, he tried to kill that person, but something bad happened and he couldn't kill that person. Maybe he was like trying to kill someone, but then someone else killed him, maybe a team kill, maybe a grenade went off, right? Like he was doing the right thing, but just something stopped him. And I feel like doing the right thing that would eventually lead to a kill is better indicative of future success rather than not doing that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That makes a lot of sense to me. I hadn't really thought about that. I like the football analogy a lot because yeah, it's a good example of the same thing. And this isn't to say, yeah, and I conflated the two a little bit that like just because the damage per kill for scrap is high, like more damage per kill, that's not to say that those kills weren't finished by his teammates. You can see just looking at scanning the other ones, Envoy 18 kills on 2300 damage. Envoy might have been the beneficiary, and yeah, I just spent the last 5 minutes talking about how it's all about if your team can convert in those into kills. So yeah, maybe some sort of adjustment for like team level damage per kill conversion to dictate, okay, you don't get, if your team was really bad at converting damage to kills, then if you had a lot of damage, that's not as impressive. But if your team was really good at it and you had a ton of damage and not a lot of kills, okay, yeah, maybe I should give you more credit. I like that a lot. I think that's
Yeah.
a good way to think about it too, because yeah, it could have been the teammate getting the kill too, and I just ignore that possibility.
One of the things I had thought about for this was that you would do, and I was trying to figure out what the I was like, this would just taking a lot longer, so I didn't do it. But if you adjusted kills based on damage, so for example, if you say, oh, 3,500 damage, that equates to, say, something, it's, oh, a kill is 70 damage. It's not exactly 150, it'd be slightly higher, right? Because you have to adjust for it. So basically, oh, 3,500 damage is 3,500 divided by 170, right? So it's actually this many kills, and then you adjust it accordingly. But then you could also adjust the entire scoreboard that way as well. Then you could be like, oh, actually, Ultra only won this by 10 kills, but actually they should have won it by 20 kills if you adjust it for damage. To say, oh, actually, Ultra was way, way better. Okay, they already won it. Maybe they won it by 20, but actually they should have won it by 50.
Yeah, I think it's tough that, like, in your example there, is that they should have won it by 50, or that or is the takeaway that they were bad at finishing those kills, so we should penalize them. Yeah, that's the part that's interesting to me is, yes, okay, if the average team would have done this and then they get below average. We know there's going to be some variance in the actual final scores relative to the average. But yeah, is that because the team was bad, or yeah, is it just normal variance? Is it, yeah, yeah, it's interesting. But yeah, another good point, I think, for sure, that it could be, yeah, it's probably some of both.
Yeah,
What do you think, CDL metrics? Yeah.
The way I view damage is it always needs to be paired with something else, whether that's kills. If it's paired with kills, you can see how efficient you are doing with your damage. And that can go on a player-to-player basis. So you can see, okay, if someone is not putting in a lot of damage, but they're getting in a lot of kills, okay, they're picking up a lot of trades and not dying. And that's good, that's valuable. And on the flip side, if someone is putting in a ton of damage, but they can't convert to kills, I think it's important to maybe look at their assist column to see, was that damage picked up by somebody else? So maybe you pair kills and assists with the damage. If you compare damage to deaths, obviously you can see how much damage you're doing before you die. That maybe would be more valuable in a respawn mode. The debate about damage and how valuable it is in search, I think, is really interesting because, Doug, you mentioned if you're putting in damage on some other player on the map in a search game, but your initial damage doesn't get the kill, essentially you've given away your position, and it's a trade-off. That I think it's still a good thing because you've maybe given away your position, but you've called out another enemy, and ideally you're telling your teammate, like, this guy is one shot behind the barrel or whatever, and that guy is also hurt. So, you're suppressing his ability to do anything on the map at that point. His number one job is just survive and get back with his teammates or whatever, get behind smoke, whatever it might be. So I think it's obviously putting in damage is good whenever you can do it. I still think it is valuable in a search game because you're at least forcing the pressure onto them. You're gaining map control, you're turning it into a 4v3 or making the other team to react to where you are now. So, yeah, it's interesting because it can be used in so many different ways depending on the game mode, but it's something I've looked into a bunch. Like, does kill efficiency matter more than how much damage you get before you die? There's a lot of work to be done there, but there's for sure a place for it.
Yeah. No, I think, and the one caveat I thought of when you were talking about this, I wrote this about Black Ops 4. You know what was different about Black Ops 4? We had stim. You could get a kill and to get damage, and you said, this guy, you know where he is, and he's weak. Bad news. In Black Ops 4, he wasn't weak. He just pops stim and instantly gets back to full health. So, yeah, that is different now. That guy is weak for a full 5 seconds after the last tag. And so that probably plays a big role. I think the big difference in search is just that, like, you're much less likely, all else equal, to have two players shooting the same player at the same time. Where in respawn, yeah, if you get a lot of damage, chances are someone else is going to be team shotting with you, or at least, yeah, the odds are a lot better. But yeah, no, that is one thing that maybe this would be worth revisiting, because yeah, Black Ops 4, it was a whole different animal. It was 5-on-5 as well, but yeah, everybody had stim. It was just like getting bullets and not getting the kill was like essentially nothing because they just stim. You have to do it twice before it really made a difference.